Canadian Secretary of State for External Affairs, recommended that the establishment of a United Nations peacekeeping force, the first of its kind, by the way, to protect the canal and ensure access to all. The UN ratified this proposal in November of 1956, and although the Suez Canal Company continued to operate the waterway, the UN force maintained access as well as peace in the nearby Sinai Peninsula. So that was the first time that the United Nations actually said, okay, we're going to step in and just try to chill everybody out. And that worked for a while, but the Arab-Israel War, which began in earnest in the Six-Day War of 1967, Nasser, at the onset of the Six-Day War, which was a spat that Israel was having with Egypt, Israel did some preemptive striking. It was a short, bloody conflict between the two of them. Israel decided to take matters in their own hands. They did an airstrike on Egypt. They went through about 6 days fighting before they signed a ceasefire thing. But at the onset of that, Nasser ordered the U.S. peacekeeping forces out of the Sinai Peninsula. Israel responded by sending troops into the region and ultimately took control of the east bank of the Suez Canal. Not wanting the Israeli ships to have access to the waterway, Nasser imposed a blockade on all maritime traffic. So he basically said nobody's going through. Well, the problem was there were ships that were in the canal, but they weren't allowing anybody in, they weren't allowing anybody out. They physically barricaded the canal. And 15 ships were basically stuck there for years. Oh, my goodness. That was 1967. It was 1979 before they signed a peace treaty.
I don't want to take a weekend cruise. I couldn't imagine that.
Good thing they had all that toilet paper.
Yeah, a lot of the people, well, there weren't very many sailors that stayed on, but a lot of them stayed on the ship for a long time. I mean, all these ships were manned this entire time. Unfortunately, by the time they had let them go, only 2 of them were still seaworthy. 13 ships could not be floated out. They were known as the Yellow Fleet.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of sand that had basically covered them in those years. So anyway, once that peace treaty was signed, all ships, including those with Israeli registration, were again had access to the waterway. The Israeli troops decided they were going to remain in the Sinai Peninsula until 1981, when they were part of an Egypt-Israeli peace treaty. The so-called multinational force and observers were stationed there to maintain order and protect the canal, and they still remain in place today.
Just record. So I looked at the Yellow Fleet stuff a little bit, and apparently the crew members were allowed to leave it. Like, they were doing like 3 months assignments. Yeah. So they could. I mean, it's still 3 months. Good Lord.
Not all of them. Yeah, some were. There were some that stayed for just an ungodly amount of time.
Well, because this all happened in 1967, and they stayed till they were stuck there till 1975. But so the ones that were there, they were starting to develop like their own little communities. So they would have like sporting and social events. They had developed their own stamps and international systems of trade. Like they were their own little community. They had to do what they had to do to get things done. For sitting there for 8 years. Yeah, and you're right. It was 1975. That's when they reopened the canal. The treaty that put an end to their hostilities. Well, was signed in 1979. So by 1975, only 2 of the vessels were still seaworthy enough to make their own make their voyage by their own power. Yeah, because they really didn't have access to anybody that could maintain them for 8 years. Mm-hmm. You put a car outside for 8 years and see how it runs after you're. Or better yet, put it in water. Put a car in water and see how it runs in 8 years. So anyway, today, except Vinny's old car, that would have still ran. Which one? The Taurus. Oh, yeah. Nothing could kill that thing. No. Or rumor has it it's still running. Yeah, rumor has it. Somebody chasing it? Today, an average of 50 ships navigate the canal daily, carrying more than 300 million tons of goods each year. Major northbound cargoes consist of crude petroleum and petroleum products, coal, ores, metals, fabricated metals, as well as woods, oilseeds, cakes, cereals. Southbound traffic consists of cement, fertilizers, fabricated metals, cereals, and often empty oil tankers. And it was in 2014 that the Egyptian government oversaw an $8 billion expansion project to widen the Suez from 61 meters to 312 meters. That's significant. For a 21-mile distance. I would say so. That's huge. Now, despite that, I think they still had a problem, did they not? Probably. Oh, talk about me. Okay. Sorry.
Wait, let me say that again. Despite that, they still had a problem, didn't they?
Nah, screw it. I'll keep all that in. So yeah, I decided to dive pretty deep into the Ever Given, which was
Ever Given. What did I say? Evergreen.
Well, that's fair.
It is, because it's the Evergreen
Ever Given is the name of the
Corporation,
ship, but it's on there so small, and Evergreen is plastered on the side of the ship.
Because those are the cargo things,
That's the
right?
charter.
Oh, okay.
Evergreen. So people think that's called the Evergreen, which it makes it very strange because people will say Ever Given. People going, are you stupid? It's Evergreen. Because, the first 5 letters are exactly the same. It's like, it couldn't be the HMS stuck in this freaking thing. And it's by Evergreen. No.
It may be now.
They might have renamed it now, but yeah. So anyway, the Ever Given is a very, very large container ship sailing from Malaysia to the Netherlands at the time. On March 23rd, 2021 at 7:40 a.m., the Ever Given was traveling through the canal when something caused it to ram into the side wall. And then, because it hit the side wall, the back end ended up pushing forward to the other wall, making a complete wall across the Suez Canal. And the thing is that this thing, I know I said it a little bit before, but it is gigantic. This is not a small ship by any stretch of the imagination. The Empire State Building with antenna in its entirety is 1,454 feet. The Ever Given is 1,312. About 140 feet shorter than the Empire State Building. This is not a small ship. So not only is it big, it's one of the largest on the water today. It has a capacity of about 20,000 units, which basically when they say units for a carrier ship like that, or not a carrier, container ship. You see them all the time on the ships. They have 20-foot containers, and however many of those they can fit on the ship is its capacity. So it being able to carry 20,000 of those, actually I think it's a little bit more than 20,000, but of those 20-foot containers, that's a significant amount of product.
I don't know if you delved into this, but those containers revolutionized the whole container shipping. There was a truck driver back in the 50s who came up with this idea of doing a standard container. And up until then, that was sort of revolutionary. You got things in bags or boxes or what have you. But he came up with this idea, and somebody in the shipping company decided that's a pretty good idea. So these 20-foot containers became the standard, or 40-foot containers, which are basically considered 2 units. And that's what you get on most ships these days. Virtually nothing but is on these 20-foot or 40-foot containers.
Yeah, except for that mom and pop store. They only wanted 3 packs of gums to sell. They got this whole container full. We don't need this much. How? Let's see. So it blocked the canal for 6 days, just under or right about 150 hours of blockage, costing billions of dollars of trade goods to be stopped to a complete halt. Things around the world were already bad enough with the COVID stuff going on. There was already, less people working, less people shipping. It was hard to get product out. So then you put this thing blocking the canal that has 12% of the world's trade going through it. So it just paused any type of economic growth that this area was hoping to get. Well, not the area, but there's a fair amount of the world. It is also the reason many ships rerouted all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, which again, not as bad as it was when 100 years ago, but still.
Yeah, and the reason being is that nobody could tell them how long it was going to take to get unstuck.
Yeah, they thought it could have been.
And so you're shipping something.
Weeks and months.
Do you gamble and sit there on your cargo for
a
month, or do you decide to go now and hope that it doesn't open up in the next 2 days?
That's a tough choice, man. When you're really stuck on this decision, like, do we go around a continent?
Yeah, do we lose millions of dollars or do we lose billions of dollars?
Either way, you're losing a crap ton of money.
Yeah.
Which, granted, so if someone went right from the beginning, said, you know what, screw it, we're just gonna go around. They probably wasn't that bad because it had only been 2 days extra, which again, any amount of hours and days is bad. But there's so much value on those ships. It's kind of like, you ever hear that thing about the trains where it's like, oh well, why are they stopping? Well, you can find them. And then you ever hear that? If you see a train stopped on a road for more than 10 minutes, you're allowed to report them or something like that.
Yeah.
Or it's like 15 minutes or something like that. But a railroad can only be blocked by a train for so long without them getting fined if they're reported. But the train company's kind of like, I'd rather take the fine, than have to do whatever they have to do to make it easier for the roads. Because again, trains, just like ships, are carrying a crap ton of money. You want to throw a $500 fine on me? Fine. That takes care of 1% of that one of the 300th car I have. Like, whatever. And what's interesting that I found out is that a ship's freight costs are about 0.6 to 2.3% of the value of the goods on board. That leaves a lot of room for profit. But people who were really hurt by this said it could have been up to 40% freight costs skyrocketing towards their complete profit. So 2.3% to up to 40%. That sucks. Especially when you're working with that kind of money, because I'm sure it can't be cheap to keep these boats running. Ships. I know how people are boats. Jack Sparrow's gonna be all upset. But so I mean, we're talking big money. Thank you, Vinny. I knew you were on my side. At 3 p.m. on March 29th, 6 days later, the Ever Given is sprung loose through a combination of tugboats, dredgers, and change in tides, along with heavy equipment and the ship's own power.
Long story short, if it wasn't for a full moon, it could still be stuck.
Potentially. The tide changing was significant.
The most significant thing.
But, the
those little
tugboats,
bulldozers they had out there weren't doing a whole lot of good.
You ever seen a dredger, though? Those things are interesting.
It did produce a whole bunch of good memes, though.
Yes, indeed.
Those little bulldozers at the bottom of the ship.
Oh, yeah, just digging out the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you ever see a dredger, though? The ships? So you have these, they're like ship equivalents of snowblowers. So yeah, they're drilling through all the sand and stuff, and then it just shoots it out like a snowblower. It's hysterical, man. It's like a big ass snowblower, a giant snowblower. Remember that.
It's a real large one.
Thank you. But
if
so
a
then,
snowblower had a face and.
So, yes, it is free and it is out of the canal, but is it at its destination? No. As of April 13th, till when we recorded now, which is only a few days later, the Egyptian court has granted the Suez Canal Authority to arrest the Ever Given.
So they apparently have decided that it was in fact a man-made problem and not a act of God.
Well, that's the thing, though. So they don't really know what happened. Who was at fault? Who the actual F knows? Because as of right now, there is a shockingly little amount of information out there. What's cool is that boats or ships do have something called a voyage data recorder, which is the equivalent of a black box for a plane. But as far as I know, nothing's been released yet. So I don't know.
Well, for obvious reasons too, because there are insurance companies that are probably lined up with their attorneys waiting to sue the crap out of whoever they can find out that's at fault. Because they all lost. I mean, all of these companies that were behind the blockage lost money.
Everybody lost money.
So
nobody gained money from this,
No.
except maybe the people who were digging it out. And they probably brought people in. I mean, people getting paid to do so. But really, no one is benefiting from this.
I can imagine if anybody on the Ever Given has an idea that it was somebody on their boat that was at fault, they're not talking.
Well, sure. So the big thing was weather, like you said before. There were reports that there was wind, that there was like some kind of sandstorm, maybe visibility was a situation. But somebody has come out, somebody of some kind of authority came out and said, that's not what we think was the problem. We're not saying, I don't think they were saying like, that had nothing to do with it, but, I mean, come on. Was the wind this once in a lifetime, once in a hundreds of years so bad that it pushed this one time? Like,
it was probably a perfect storm of things.
I mean, maybe, but chances are that the wind has been this bad before. So I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I'm sure that the people that have the boat are saying they were going a certain way. I mean, I listened to a podcast where a guy was talking about how he would rather land a 747 in bad weather because you've got more flexibility than you do with a boat, because you've got a boat that